Good day. So for today's lecture, we're going to discuss about the biochemical basis of blood or blood chemistry. I am Dr. Don Jerome Santo Domingo and I will be your lecturer for today. Okay. So if you're familiar with the rule of two-thirds, our body weight no, is comprised of two-thirds water and one-third solid component. In this two-thirds of water, intracellular fluid is around 60 to 70% of this water portion of our total body weight, while the one third is located in the extracellular fluid or outside the cell. Two-thirds of which is located in the interstitial space, which is in between cell, and one third is located in the intravascular space or inside your blood vessel. That's one third of the extracellular fluid. So if you're going to do the math, the blood itself is around 8 to 10% of the total body weight. So that's around 5 liters of blood in an average 70 kilogram person. So for today's discussion, we'll be focusing more here not in the intravascular space. Okay, so the blood is a viscous fluid or viscous fluid comprising your cellular and your fluid portion. The cellular portion is comprised of your formed elements or your RCBC, your WBC, your platelets, as well as the plasma proteins that we're going to discuss later on. The fluid portion, on the other hand, uh, uh, has your plasma and your serum. They're basically the same thing. It's just that the plasma, which is the yellow portion of the blood, that remains once it is centrifuged or when it's left, that's the plasma. So it contains the fibrinogen as well as your clotting factors, which is absent in your serum. So the blood has many functions. It's actually the primary avenue by which the tissues are connected to each other and to the environment outside. No, so it can serve as transport. No, can do regulatory function as well as protective function. No, so respiration. No, you all know that exchange of gases is carried out by the blood. No, particularly your red blood cell, which contains your heme, that can transport up to 4 molecules of oxygen. Okay, so for nutrition, you also know that RBC transports the nutrients from the absorbed food materials and metabolites. For excretion, it can transport metabolic waste to the kidneys, to the lungs, skin, as well as the intestines for removal. So the blood is also the um, the major way on how cells can communicate because if you know, no hormones are what do you call this are substances that are produced by endocrine organs to be secreted in the blood or in the plasma to reach its target organ. So um, it also helps in the transport of hormones or blood. For regulatory function, your RBC also helps in buffering the pH, the blood pH. It also controls the body temperature, when we have vasodilation and constriction through dissipation of heat. No? Protective function includes your WBC. As you know, they are the one that fights off microbes, antibodies that is produced by your plasma cells, as well as the coagulation cascade, that we're going to discuss later on. Okay, so what are the components of your plasma? So as I mentioned, plasma is the yellow portion that remains after the blood is centrifuged. It has water, electrolytes, different metabolites, proteins, the nutrients, as well as hormones. So the plasma composition, no, is the same as all the extracellular fluid. It's just that your plasma contains higher amounts of cations as well as your protein compared to the interstitial fluid. Okay, seen here, no, your different plasma proteins. The total plasma proteins that are present in our plasma is around 7 to 7.5 grams per deciliter. So it contains so the plasma contains a mixture of different proteins, no, as you can see here in the figure on the right, no. So you have albumin, no, hemoglobin. No, the largest would be your beta 1 lipoprotein with a molecular weight of around 1.3 million. You also have your fibrinogen, no? So these plasma proteins can either be a simple protein, no? Where, a simple protein is exemplified by your albumin, meaning they are not complex with other macromolecules, so it's purely protein. They can also be complex with sugar molecules or carbohydrates, no, to form your glycoproteins. And majority of your plasma proteins are actually glycoproteins. No? And the last one would be your lipoprotein, as exemplified by your alpha 1 and beta 1 lipoprotein. They are mainly responsible for transporting different lipoproteins in the blood, no, and from the intestine, from our diet. So important also to take note, okay, very important to take note, is that these plasma proteins are rich in disulfide bonds. No? So that's the primary bond that hold them in place, no? Your disulfide bonds. So plasma proteins can be separated by different methods. No? One is the salting out method, wherein they would use a solvent or an electrolyte like your sodium or ammonium sulfate to remove protein fractions, no, according to their solubility characteristics. No? So different plasma proteins would solubilize at different concentration of solvents. For instance, no, in a solution, no, let's say you have um, you have this plasma protein A and B, no, you would need, let's say, the first solution, no, contains a plasma protein that would solubilize at a higher rate of solvent and electrolytes, and the other one would require least amount of or lesser amount of ammonium or sodium sulfate. So the more ka nagdadagdag ng sodium or ammonium sulfate, it tends to clump the protein together. So kung gaano karami dinagdag na sodium or ammonium sulfate, that would determine, no, the type of lipoprotein that you're going to see when you use the sorting out method. No? On the other hand, electrophoresis, no, is actually the most common type, no, of electrophoresis that is utilized to separate the different plasma protein. Okay, so this is an example of your cellulose acetate zone electrophoresis, no, wherein you use your cellulose acetate as the medium. Okay, so in this procedures are so a small amount of protein, as indicated here by the red portion, is actually applied to a strip. No, this strip is the cellulose acetate. So once you stain the cellulose acetate with a small portion of a serum, it's now called an electrophoretogram. Okay, so next, electrophoresis of a sample is done in a buffer. So staining now enables the separation of different bands, as you can see here in letter C, no, of the protein for them to be visualized. So your electrophoresis now actually contains an anode side, no, which is the positively charged side, and an anode side. Okay. So once they are separated now, here they are actually quantified, no, using a densitometer, no. So as you can see here, no, we can actually quantify the amount of, sorry, we can quantify the amount of the plasma proteins that is seen in the plasma. And here, no, as you can see, albumin, no, albumin is the one with the highest concentration, okay, and would travel towards the anode side, no, and gamma globulin or the gamma plasma protein would remain in the anode side. Sorry, this is the cathode side. This is the anode side, no? Cathode, anode. Okay? So what I would like to emphasize here is that since we can actually utilize electrophoresis to also quantify, different concentration of plasma proteins, it can also tell us something about our patient. For example, we have a patient with a nephrotic syndrome. No, nephrotic syndrome is actually a disease that wherein our kidneys is non-functional. We tend to excrete a lot of albumin, no, in patients with nephrotic syndrome. So what do you expect to happen is that the albumin portion, no, would tend to have a lower, no, concentration. Also in the so also in patients with high levels of infection, no, kapag may infection tayo, no, the gamma portion here would have a higher concentration that is secondary to an increase in the level of your immunoglobulins. No, immunoglobulins, no, are actually examples of your gamma plasma proteins. They are also called as your gamma globulins. So when you have infection, our body would secrete more gamma globulins or immunoglobulins. This portion here would tend to be higher. Okay, so this slide is very important now because this will guide us now with regards to the different plasma proteins in the different regions of your plasma protein electrophoresis. No? So you have your alpha 1, alpha 2, beta, and gamma. Okay? Albumin, no? Is a simple protein that we have discussed a while ago. For globulin, no, you have your alpha 1, no? Examples under alpha 1 would be your alpha 1 antitrypsin, which is an antiprotease. You also have your transcortin, which is a plasma protein responsible for transporting steroid molecules. You also have your vitamin D binding protein. For alpha 2, we have your alpha 2 macroglobulin. We have your haptoglobin, no, which is a negative regulator of iron. We also have your retinol binding protein as well as your prothrombin. Okay. In the beta portion of your electrophoresis, no, you have your transferrin, which is the one that transport iron in the circulation. You also have your hemopexin, fibrinogen, as well as your plasmin. And of course, the gamma portion will be your immunoglobulins, like we have discussed in the previous slide. Okay, so let's just make some um, generalization. So plasma proteins actually determines the distribution of fluid between the blood and the tissues, no? Particularly your albumin, no? So uh, they are the ones that determine the distribution of fluids, no, in between the tissues. So most of your plasma proteins are synthesized in the liver, no? And many of the plasma protein actually exhibits polymorphism. No? So polymorphism just tells us that in different individuals, no, because of genetics, no, we would have different um, plasma protein. What do you call this? Characteristic, no, in different individual. And each plasma protein, you need to remember, have a characteristic half-life. And this half-life may be altered in disease states, no? Like for instance, no, when you have nephrotic syndrome, no, the normal what do you call this? The normal half-life of your albumin, no, When we say half-life, that is the amount of time it takes for the circulating molecules to be reduced by 50%. So for albumin, when you have nephrotic syndrome, when you have severe liver disease, no, it would decrease, no? So the normal half-life is around 20 days. So siguro kapag meron ka nephrotic syndrome, magiging 3 to 5 days na lang. So you'll be depleted with the circulating albumin, no? So, okay. So as I've mentioned, no, plasma protein actually determines the fluid distribution, no? So as you can see here, in the arteriolar side, no, hydrostatic pressure, no, hydrostatic pressure is the pressure that drives the fluid out of the blood vessel. So siya yung nagpapalabas ng fluid, no? While the oncotic pressure is the pressure that holds the fluid inside the intravascular space. And the plasma protein actually determines this oncotic pressure. So in the arterial side, as you can see here, basically the higher, uh, um, because of the higher hydrostatic pressure, it would have a positive 11 millimeter mercury value. This would actually cause the fluid to go outside the intravascular space in the arterial side. In the venous side, as you can see here, the oncotic pressure now has a higher pressure compared to your hydrostatic pressure, because you know that the venous side is the low pressure side. So here you would have a 9 millimeter mercury inward, no, um, fluid distribution. So it tends to go inside, no? So you may be asking, Doc, di ba 11 millimeter yung outward um, distribution ng fluid, pero yung inward is only 9 millimeter mercury. Nasaan po yung 2 millimeter mercury? That is when your what do you call this, lymphatics comes into play. No? So any excess fluid that is in the interstitial space, no, would be carried by your lymphatics. Okay? So the concentration of plasma protein are very important in determining the fluid distribution, no? Particularly your albumin. As you can see here, no, basically if you have decrease in plasma protein concentration, which is the one that determines your oncotic pressure, so ano mangyayari? Meron bang force that would drive the fluid inside the intravascular space? Wala. Or it will become lesser. So the result of it would be the accumulation of fluid in the extravascular space. So lalabas sila doon, and that would eventually cause your edema, no? Or fluid outside of the tissues. Okay? So as I mentioned a while ago, most of your plasma proteins are synthesized in the liver, no? Around 70 to 80%, no? Some plasma proteins like your von Willebrand factor, no, is synthesized in the endothelial cells. Most of them are membrane-bound polyribosome, and as I mentioned already a while ago, they are mostly glycoproteins. So they are complex with a sugar or a carbohydrate molecule. So here, these are example of your plasma proteins that are synthesized in the liver. They include your albumin, no? Which is actually a simple plasma protein. Hindi sila kasali dito sa glycoprotein. No? Simple lang siya, purely protein. You have your fibrinogen that is needed for clotting, your transferrin that is needed for the transport of your iron in the circulation. So they are synthesized in the liver as well as your complement proteins as well as the proteins responsible for the coagulation cascade. Exception to plasma protein synthesis in the liver, as I've mentioned, von Willebrand factor, as well as your, ano yung isa pa natin diniscuss, in the serum protein electrophoresis, that would be your gamma globulins. They are synthesized by your lymphocytes, specifically your plasma cells. Okay? So, plasma proteins, as I mentioned a while ago, would exhibit polymorphism. This is actually a Mendelian trait that exists in population in which at least two phenotypes, neither of which are rare. No? So here on the right side no, are different plasma proteins that exhibits polymorphism. The best known example of which of human polymorphism is actually your ABO blood grouping. No? So ito yung mag-explain bakit yung isang person, type A, yung isa type O, no? And yung iba type AB. Okay? So another example would be your alpha-1 antitrypsin, okay? Your haptoglobin, your transferrin, ceruloplasmin, and your immunoglobulin. Okay? What are the different functions of your plasma proteins? So they can act as antiproteases. The best known example would be your alpha-1 antitrypsin, very important. You also have your anti-chymotrypsin, your alpha-2 macroglobulin, and your anti-thrombin, which um, antagonizes the effects of your thrombin. We also have, they are also responsible for blood clotting, no, as exemplified by your coagulation factors, as well as your fibrinogen. So they are also important, no? They also serve as enzymes, no? Like some of the proteins in the coagulation system, no? Acts as enzyme as well as aminotransferases. If you're familiar with your liver function test, AST and ALT, your alanine and um, aspartate aminotransferases, no? So they are enzymes that is needed for transamination reaction. Okay, erythropoietin is actually an example of your plasma protein that serves as a hormone no, for the synthesis of your RBC. Okay, other function would be the immune defense, no, as exemplified by your immunoglobulins, the proteins in the complement system, as well as your beta 2 microglobulin. So they can also be seen no, when there's an inflammatory process, no, like your C-reactive protein, no, oncofetal protein, like your alpha-fetoprotein is an example also of plasma protein. So they can also transport and bind other proteins um, like your albumino. They can bind several drugs. They can also bind what do you call this bilirubin. They can also bind steroid hormones. No, you also have your ceruloplasmin um, that can what do you call this transport copper in the circulation. But copper can also be transported by albumin. Okay, remember that. You have your transcortin that is responsible for transport of corticosteroid in the circulation. You also have your haptoglobin that is responsible for transport of extracorpuscular hemoglobin. You also have your lipoprotein that is the one transporting the different lipids. Now your um, the different lipids in the circulation from the liver to the tissues, then from the tissues going back to the liver. Hemopexin is the one that transports heme molecule, your transferrin, no, as I mentioned, transport iron in the circulation. Your transferrin, formerly known as prealbumin, is capable of binding T4. Okay, your sex hormone binding globulin capable of transporting different sex hormones. Okay, so basically, this is just the um, repetition of what I mentioned earlier. Okay, so let's now proceed with albumin. So albumin is actually the major protein seen in the human plasma. So of the 7 to 7.5 grams of plasma protein, albumin contributes to around 3.4 to 4.7 grams per deciliter. Okay, so 60% of total plasma protein production is uh, being carried out for production of albumin. So they have low molecular mass, as you see a while ago in the picture, but they are the most abundant in the human plasma. That's why they are the primary plasma proteins that determine the oncotic pressure inside the intravascular space. Okay, so let's now go to the we call this pathway of albumin synthesis. So actually, your albumin is initially synthesized as pre-proalbumin in the liver. Okay, so you can see here. So this pre-proalbumin contains a signaling peptide or a signal peptide. This signal peptide is needed for it to be recognized by the rough endoplasmic reticulum. Okay, so in the rough endoplasmic reticulum, there's a signal peptidase that would cleave this signal peptide. Okay, transforming now your pre-proalbumin to proalbumin. Okay, so this proalbumin is converted next to your albumin while inside a transport vesicle, no, through the use of your furin. So your furin would cleave a seven amino acid residue here, a seven hexapeptide from your proalbumin to convert it now to your mature albumin. Now this mature albumin would be secreted in the plasma, now forming or now performing its function. Okay. So there are several disease states that arises from um, decreased synthesis of albumin. One would be your liver disease. No, that's understandable because when liver is the primary organ that would synthesize your um, albumin as well as your kwashiorkor. No, so your kwashiorkor is actually a form of your protein, energy malnutrition, or protein calorie malnutrition. Another example of a disease related to albumin, which is your analbuminemia. Analbuminemia is actually a genetic mutation that impairs the ability to synthesize your albumin. Okay, but this patient would tend to form moderate edema. They would not experience severe edema. Why is that? Because when you lack albumin, there would be a compensatory increase in the formation of other plasma protein. And when those other plasma protein increase, they would be the one performing the function of albumin to control the oncotic pressure. Okay? So your mature albumin contains one polypeptide chain with 585 amino acid residues that are organized into three functional domains. As you see in the picture a while ago, they are ellipsoidal in shape, and because of this ellipsoidal in shape, no, they do not actually increase the plasma viscosity. Remember that. They don't make your blood thicker. Okay? So, as I mentioned, 75 to 80% of your osmotic or your oncotic pressure no, is carried out by your albumin. Okay? And it is capable of binding various ligands. No? So, it can bind free fatty acid, it can bind calcium, it can bind steroid molecules, it can bind copper molecules. It can also bind other drugs like your phenytoin, warfarin, digoxin, um, other drugs like your valproic acid, even antibiotics like your penicillin and sulfonamides. Okay? An important clinical correlation of your albumin binding is that drugs that are binded to albumin no, is said to be in its inactive form. No? Only those free from albumin is able to exert its pharmacologic action. Let's say you have two drugs that are competing for the same binding site of albumin. No? So if you have drug A, I'll try to share my screen, share a whiteboard. So if you actually have this albumin, no, and let's say it has a binding site, no, for drug, no, let's say you have drug A and drug B, no. Okay, when drug B binds to the binding site, no, and let's say you have another drug B that binds to the other site, no, in the albumin, that would render this drug A free. And as we said, no, as I've said, only the free drug that is capable of um, what do you call this, performing its pharmacologic action. No, for example, this drug A is actually um, an anticoagulant medication, so it will cause the patient to form clots, no, because this drug A is freely, no, and instead of binding to its site of action, it's freely floating in the plasma, capable of doing its pharmacologic action. Okay. Another example would be your bilirubin, no? Bilirubin, let's say instead of drug A, let's say this is bilirubin, unconjugated bilirubin or B1, no? You all know that B1 or unconjugated bilirubin is highly lipophilic, right? It would tend to go to different compartments because of its non-polar characteristic. So it's capable of binding to albumin, but if the binding sites of albumin is bound to other medication, let's say this drug B is penicillin, no? So let's just indicate pen. So let's say that drug B is a penicillin that is bounded to your albumin binding site. So bilirubin now cannot be binded or cannot be taken up by your albumin, and instead it's freely floating in the circulation. No? Would there be a problem? Yes, no, because it can deposit into the other tissues, no, specifically in the brain, no, causing now your kernicterus, no. Okay. Oops. Oops. Okay, so that's basically the clinical correlation of your albumin. Next would be your haptoglobin. Your haptoglobin is a plasma glycoprotein. So it is complex with a sugar molecule or a carbohydrate that is able to bind your extracorpuscular hemoglobin. Okay? So yung hemoglobin daw na present outside of the RBC, no, when we say extracorpuscular, that's outside the cell. Okay? So actually, per deciliter of your haptoglobin, it can salvage around 40 to 180 milligrams of hemoglobin. Okay, so uh, normally, no, if you have already discussed the heme metabolism, after 120 days, no, your RBC will be degraded. 90% um, of the mature RBC, no, or the old damaged RBCs would be engulfed by your reticuloendothelial system, your macrophages. But some, no, approximately 10% of that hemolyzed or degraded RBC would release its hemoglobin in the circulation. No? So that is being taken care of by your haptoglobin. Okay? So that's the function of it. It prevents the loss of free hemoglobin, no, into the kidneys. Because as you know, hemoglobin, once it goes to your kidney, can actually damage it. Aside from preventing the loss of hemoglobin, free hemoglobin into the kidney, it is also capable of conserving iron. So how does it do that? Okay, so when you have hemoglobin or when you have hemolysis of your RBC, it would release its free hemoglobin. The free hemoglobin has a molecular weight of around 65,000 or 65 kilodalton. So when it's eliminated in the kidney, no, so it would precipitate no, in your renal tubules, no, causing now a loss of iron as well as damaging now your kidneys. Okay, but when you have haptoglobin complexing, when they are forming complex with your free hemoglobin, it would increase now its molecular weight to 155,000 or 155 kilodaltons. This molecular weight or the size of that complex cannot pass through the kidneys. So there would be no iron that is lost in the kidneys. Iron or hemoglobin would not precipitate in the tubules, no? And in that sense, no, your iron is conserved and your kidneys are protected. Okay? So what are the disease states that affects your haptoglobin? So when you have hemolytic anemia, that would result to a low level of haptoglobin. Bakit? Kasi when you have hemolytic anemia, like your sickle cell anemia, no, or when you have malaria, wherein you have increase in the turnover of your RBC, do you have a lot of hemoglobin that is released in the circulation? Yes. Do you need more haptoglobin to be complex with this molecule? Yes. So it's in that sense, no, nako-consume yung haptoglobin natin. So in hemolytic anemia, that would lead to low levels of your haptoglobin. The opposite is true no, when you have inflammatory state. As you see, no, haptoglobin um, is also a plasma proteins that is upregulated no, during inflammatory processes no, or processes. So later on, we will be discussing its importance. No? So in hemolytic anemia, no, what would happen is that it would decrease the half-life of your haptoglobin from its normal 5 days no, half-life. It would decrease now to around 90 minutes. No? Next would be your hemopexin. No? So hemopexin is actually a type of beta-1 globulin. So pag nag-travel siya doon sa serum protein electrophoresis, dun siya sa beta-1 pupunta. Okay? So as I mentioned earlier, it is capable of binding heme, no? But not hemoglobin. So yung heme portion lang, hindi niya kinakabitan yung hemoglobin. How does it do that? No? Albumin, no, would complex with your met heme, no? Yung heme that is in a ferric state. Now they will form a complex known as your met heme albumin. Now, this metheme albumin or the albumin would transfer now the metheme into your hemopexin. This complex is then internalized by your hepatocyte and eventually degraded to bilirubin. No? Okay? So iron, no, where do we see iron in our body? So we can see that in your hemoglobin, specifically in the heme portion. You also have your myoglobin, which also contains heme. We can also see iron no, in your cytochromes no, that is important in the different processes in our body like your electron transport chain. No? We also see iron no, in your enzyme ribonucleotide reductase. Okay? So iron is actually lost per day around 1 milligram in males and around 1.5 milligrams in female. No? The higher loss, average loss of iron in female is due to women no, having their monthly menstrual period. Okay, that's why females are more common to develop iron deficiency anemia. Okay? So let's now proceed with the iron absorption. So absorption of inorganic dietary iron, no, by the enterocyte, no, this is the enterocyte, no, happens in your proximal duodenum. So pag tinanong kayo saan ang site of iron absorption, that would be your proximal duodenum. Okay? So the dietary iron, no, mostly in the ferric state, no, would be converted into the ferrous form, no, Fe2 plus, by an enzyme, no, in the apical portion of your uh, duodenal enterocyte known as your ferri-reductase, no? And with the aid of vitamin C and gastric acid, that would facilitate the conversion of ferric to ferrous iron, no? That is why it is very important as health professionals to what I call this do health teaching to our patient. Then when they are taking iron supplementation, no, make sure that they are taking it in an empty stomach to facilitate the conversion of ferric to ferrous iron. Now, why do we need to convert the ferric to ferrous iron? Because there's also a transporter that is present in the apical portion of your enterocyte known as your divalent metal transporter 1. This DMT1 is capable only of accepting, no, metals in their divalent form. No? So kailangan yung iron is in its divalent metal form, which is your ferrous form. Once inside the enterocyte, no, your ferrous iron can either be stored, no, in the enterocyte, no, as your ferritin, or they can go out of the basal portion of your enterocyte, no, utilizing your ferroportin. In the basolateral side, no, here, no, your ferrous iron needs to be converted back again to its ferric state by a copper-containing peroxidase enzyme known as your hepastine. Eh, Doc, bakit ganon? Yung ferric to ferrous, tapos pagbalik doon, yung ferrous, gagawin din palang ferric. That is because the transferrin that is responsible for transporting iron in the circulation, no, specifically two molecules of iron, can only accommodate the ferric state. Okay? So hindi siya isasakay kapag ferrous state siya. Okay? Okay? So bakit ba natin, Doc, bakit po kailangang isakay pa yung iron sa transferrin? Hindi ba pwedeng freely floating na siya sa circulation? No. Why? Because free iron is said to be very toxic to our body. Why? Because it is capable of inducing formation of reactive oxygen species. No? This reactive oxygen species is capable of oxidizing different cellular macromolecules. No? Your ferrous iron, no, can react with hydrogen peroxide to produce 2-hydroxyl ion. And these 2-hydroxyl ion, no, are examples of reactive oxygen species that can damage the cellular macromolecules that are present in the cell membrane. Okay? So now let's discuss transferrin, which is the plasma protein involved in the transport of iron in the circulation. Transferrin is an example of your beta 1 globulin. Okay? So it is a glycoprotein that is synthesized in the liver. So again, it is complex with a sugar molecule. So transferrin is able to bind two molecules of ferric iron, no? Tandaan, ferric iron. So once iron is bounded to your transferrin, ang tawag sa kanya, holotransferrin. Okay? So transferrin actually is related to your total iron binding capacity. The higher the transferrin, the higher the transferrin available for binding uh, ferric iron, the higher the total binding capacity. Imagine niyo kapag madaming free transferrin, madaming masasakyan ang iron. Mataas din ang total iron binding capacity. Okay? Okay, so the concentration of your transferrin in the plasma is around 300 milligrams per deciliter. And this 300 milligrams per deciliter is capable of binding 300 micrograms per deciliter of iron. The normal saturation of your transferrin is about 30%. No? So anything less than 30%, you have decreased, no, binding, no, in your transferrin. And that would tell us that you have iron deficiency anemia. So if you have decrease in binding ng iron into your transferrin, so that is iron deficiency. When you have increase in the binding of iron, no, in your transferrin, you have iron overload. Okay? So, anong importance ng saturation ng transferrin, no? Or transferrin saturation? That can be used as a diagnostic tool when you are diagnosing iron deficiency anemia. No? So ano ba ang formula ng transferrin saturation? Wait. Transferrin saturation. Okay? So transferrin saturation is actually serum iron divided by total iron binding capacity. So the normal, no, would be around 30%. No, actually 20 to 50%, that's a range. If it's less than 20%, a patient is said to have your iron deficiency anemia. If it's more than 50%, no, that is already iron overload. If you're going to take a look at the formula here, your total iron binding capacity is inversely proportional, di ba? Divisor siya. So it's inversely proportional to your transferrin saturation. So ibig sabihin, the higher the transferrin saturation, the lower the total iron binding capacity. Bakit? Kapag saturated na yung transferrin, madami ng iron ang bounded to transferrin, yung binding capacity niya bumababa na kasi marami nang nakabind sa kanya. The opposite is true. Kapag mababa yung transferrin saturation, ibig sabihin, kokonti lang yung iron na nakakabit sa kanya, mas madami pa siyang site na pwedeng mag-bind. So ano mangyayari sa total iron binding capacity? It would increase. Okay? So remember that concept. Total iron binding capacity is inversely proportional to your transferrin saturation. Formula of transferrin saturation, serum iron divided by total iron binding capacity. Less than 20%, it's iron deficiency anemia. More than 50%, it's related to iron overload. Okay. Okay, this picture just shows us the transferrin cycle that facilitates the cellular uptake of iron. Okay, so the recipient cell must bind the circulating transferrin para magamit niya yung iron that is being carried by transferrin. Okay, so the transferrin receptor no is present in all in almost all the cells in our body, but they are especially abundant in the erythroid precursor cell. Siyempre, sila yung gagamit ng circulating iron, no? Your erythrocyte precursor cell. In the membrane of your erythrocyte precursor cell, you have your transferrin receptor that would bind your holotransferrin. Again, holotransferrin is a transferrin with two molecules of ferric ion attached to it. Okay? Once it is binded to your receptor, it would then be internalized no, into an endosome. No? We have your early and late endosome here. Okay? So it would be taken up no, by the cell. Once inside the endosome, no, the acidic endosome is an acidic place no, to be in. So this acidic pH in the endosome causes iron to dissociate no, from the holotransferrin. Okay, now the iron that is outside no, the holotransferrin is a ferric, yeah, correct. The ferric form of iron. Now, as you can see here in the endosome, in the late endosome, again, it has divalent metal ion transporter 1. So sabi nga natin, sino lang yung tinatanggap ni DMT1? Only those no, with the divalent form of metal yung pwedeng dumaan sa kanya. So kailangan na rin again i-convert si ferric ion to its ferrous form using a ferri-reductase enzyme. No, kailangan siyang i-reduce. No, that is also known as your STIP3 enzyme. No? So the reducing equivalent that is needed for this process is your NADPH. No, NADPH. No, that is different from NADH. Okay? Now, once it is converted into the ferrous form, no, it can now exit the endosome using your divalent metal transporter 1. Now, this transferrin, no, yung transferrin na wala ng iron, ang tawag sa kanya is apotransferrin, no? And it would be extruded out of the cell, no? So that the transferrin can again scavenge other iron, no? So, ito mali lang tong figure na to kasi dapat once iron is liberated, wala nang iron dito. Okay? Again, babalik din yung transferrin receptor in the cell membrane of the cell so it can again perform its function to bind to a transferrin bounded to an ion. Okay? Next is your ceruloplasmin. Ceruloplasmin is an alpha-2 globulin. So pag tinignan nyo dun sa serum protein electrophoresis kanina, it would travel in the alpha-2 portion. So like your other plasma protein, it is synthesized in the liver. And because it contains a higher concentration of copper, no, it exhibits a blue color. Ceruloplasmin no, carries 90% of copper in the plasma, no? And the other plasma protein that carries copper in the plasma is your albumin, which is what we discussed a while ago. It has a ferroxidase activity, so it can convert your ferrous to ferric form. And one molecule of your ceruloplasmin is capable of binding 6 atoms of copper. So are you familiar with this picture? So this picture just shows us no, the degradation of your senescent RBC. After 120 days, no, your RBC would be phagocytized by your macrophages in the spleen and in the liver. So heme now, or your hemoglobin, would then be broken into into its globin portion, which then be recycled, no, and would go into the amino acid pool. The heme portion would then be broken down to biliverdin using the enzyme heme oxygenase. No? As you can see, heme oxygenase is the only enzyme in our body that is capable of producing carbon monoxide. Okay, so in that process, it's also able to liberate the ferrous ion. Biliverdin would then be subsequently converted into your bilirubin that would eventually be conjugated in the liver, not to be excreted as your conjugated bilirubin, no, your stercobilin in the stool or your urobilin in the urine. This ferrous iron, no, would then be transported into the circulation using your ferroportin, no? Your ferroportin, otherwise known as your NRAMP1. Once outside the macrophage, no, this ferrous iron, no, ano kailangan mangyari dun sa ferrous iron? It needs to be oxidized into the ferric form, no, via your ceruloplasmin. Bakit nga uli kailangan i-oxidize yung ferrous to ferric iron? Because transferrin again is waiting there, and transferrin is only capable of binding the ferric form of iron. Okay? So there are several disease conditions that are related to your ceruloplasmin. One is your hypoceruloplasminemia, which is caused by a deficiency in your ceruloplasmin. Okay? So this would result to inability to recycle iron, di ba nga, yung ceruloplasmin is needed for oxidation of iron, leading to accumulation of iron into the liver and other tissues. No? So aceruloplasminemia is a genetic mutation. In this case, it would abolish the peroxidase activity of the ceruloplasmin. So pwedeng meron ka pa rin ceruloplasmin, pero yung enzymatic activity niya diminishes. So it also results in accumulation of iron in the pancreatic islet cells. No? So kapag na-deposit siya doon, di ba sabi natin, yung free iron is capable of producing free radicals, no? So pwede niyang i-damage yung pancreas that can lead to diabetes mellitus, okay? It can also be deposited into the basal ganglia of the brain, no? Causing now your motor abnormalities, okay? You also have your Wilson's disease, which is a mutation in the gene for the copper binding ATPase, okay? So it would also diminish its activity. So in Wilson's disease, you block the excretion of copper in the bile, so hindi siya lalabas dun sa bile, and there would be copper accumulation in the liver. This copper accumulation in the liver would produce a paradoxic effect, no? So yung expected natin na copper na may incorporate in your ceruloplasmin, that would not happen. So it also leads to apoceruloplasmin. Okay? So this would decrease the ceruloplasmin levels, leading to copper toxicosis. So this copper toxicosis would manifest as hemolytic anemia, chronic liver disease, as well as your neurological damage. No? Okay? This ends the part 1 of our lecture of blood chemistry.